Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we are actually talking about your physical health because it might be worse off if you can hear this or see me talking to you right now. Here's what's going on. This is coming from NextGov via their totally obvious section on reporting here, and this is what's going on. A new study finds a link between social media use and biological and psychological indicators associated with poor physical health, in this case among college students. Now, researchers found that participants who use social media excessively, which is the vast majority of college-age students, had higher levels of what are known as C-reactive proteins, or CRP. Now, CRP is a biological marker of chronic inflammation that predicts things like serious illnesses such as diabetes, certain cancers, and even cardiovascular disease. In addition to elevated CRP levels, results also suggested that higher social media use was also related to somatic symptoms as well: headaches, chest pains, back pains, more frequent visits to the doctors and health centers for basically treatments of various illnesses as well. And to quote David Lee, an assistant professor of communication at the University of Buffalo and the first author in this study in cyberpsychology, behavior, and social networking, I quote, "Social media has become an integral part of many young adults' lives. It's critical that we understand how engagement across these platforms contributes to physical health." Now, for decades, researchers have devoted attention to how social media engagement relates to users' mental health, but its effects on physical health have not been thoroughly investigated. Recent surveys indicate that social media usage is particularly high for people in their late teens and early 20s. I've talked about that extensively. That's a population that spends about 6 hours a day texting or online or using social media. And though a few studies have found links between social media usage and physical health, that research relied on largely self-reporting or the effects of usage with exclusivity to one platform. Now, researchers in this case recruited a diverse sample of 251 undergrad students between the ages of 18 and 24 for this study. They then collected blood samples through finger sticks, and participants also completed questionnaires on physical health and social media usage on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. Obviously, some of the most popular platforms the time this data was collected in 2017. Obviously, they would have added TikTok to that list now as well, as much as I have issues with TikTok, and you can watch and see those later in your poor physical health along with me. Now, those responses were cross-checked with another survey that actually measured their validity by determining the degree to which participants took their role in study seriously, in particular this study. And I quote Mr. Lee again, or Dr. Lee, I believe, "We were able to establish a correlation between the amount of social media use and these physical health indicators. Though the more participants used social media, the more somatic symptoms they experienced and visits to the doctors they reported. They also showed higher levels of chronic inflammation." Now, this study, according to Lee, is just the beginning to understand the relationship between social media and physical health. And I quote again, "By looking at a biological marker in the blood, we were able to find a relatively more objective association between social media usage and physical health. But this correlational finding can't rule out the possibility that poor health impacts social media usage." Meaning, if you have poor health and you're not that mobile and all of that, a good alternative outside of watching TV would be to go to social media. Now, Lee says that basically the old axiom could hold true with social media as well as physical health. In other words, the rich get richer while the poor get poorer. And I quote, "In our previous research, we found those high in self-esteem benefited from using social media, but people low in self-esteem did not. So the effect may be more nuanced." And I think this is kind of obvious in some ways or not. Obviously, if we are sitting in more sedentary in front of computers, whether it's social media or watching movies or TVs or whatever it is, we obviously see a whole lot of less activity, which means we begin to see an obesity problem, which we have here in the United States. I am by no means, Arnold Schwarzenegger in shape-wise here, and so I completely understand that as well. I also think it really comes down to, on top of this, which I think is interesting, because they actually took biological samples of blood to try to essentially confirm these things, and apparently their research is showing that. But we can also see societal changes to how we are raising kids in a media age. And if you are looking at essentially the explosion of things like cable news network in the 1990s, as well as sensationalized stories, meaning these cable news networks had to be on 24 hours a day, and so now all of a sudden kidnappings are massive media events, in the forefront, all these things. And if you grew up in the 1990s of any kind of age and remember the sensationalism of, the OJ trial and Bill Clinton and all these kinds of things, that there was a shifting in parenting where, if you grew up in the 80s or earlier, you could leave all day and come back at night, when it was dinner time, and your parents had no idea what you were doing. But with the age of cell phones, pagers, instant communication, and then essentially hyperbole on television to scare everybody that your kid's going to be kidnapped if he or she is not in your sight within every 5 to 10 seconds or so, these things really added up. And now you add on top of that generations of video game systems that are more intuitive, more interesting, then went online so that people didn't have to actually meet up. You could play with your friends online from your own home, and here we are. So we are essentially raising an entire society that is a lot more sedentary by virtue of 30 years ago. And that's something that I think we have to have as a reckoning. Now, on top of that, you add essentially social media to that, where studies have shown Jean Twenge, for example, is a perfect one. Jonathan Haidt in his book as well, The Coddling of the American Mind, which I actually recently just read and I thought was beyond fascinating. We start to see these rises in mental health issues, as was mentioned here, and we also know that there are correlations between mental health and physical health. And so I think all of this is really stuck together. And I mean, while it's obvious to say, well, yeah, you're going to be in worse physical health if you're sitting on your butt all day on social media, that answer is true if you're sitting on your butt all day reading books and doing nothing as well. And so I think this is going to be rather interesting to see where this evolves into, where this research goes. But I think it's a problem that we society-wise really need to start addressing. And essentially it just starts with having this conversation, but it also starts with understanding the problem. And so there you go. That's your news of the day. And once again, if you're listening to this or reading or listening to this or hearing to this, odds are you're on some form of social media, which is where most of my followers are. And so there you go. I hope you are in good mental and physical health. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, which might actually lower your physical health. And follow me on YouTube, which may be doing the same thing as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.